Hey guys, here we are again. Okay, so we're back with our 289 engine here. If you take a look at this, what we've done is we went ahead and final washed this engine. What that consists of is we take and we scrub the block with hot soap and water. You got to make sure it's hot water. Don't clean this with cold water. I like to use dishwashing liquid. I didn't do that on camera. I actually have another video where we're final washing a big block Chevrolet. So if you want to watch that, it's the same procedure. I didn't want to bore you with all that. So we've got our block here, and we need to establish our bearing clearances. What we've got is we've got our main bearings installed in the engine, and we got a few tools over here. This is a micrometer. If you don't have a micrometer or a set of micrometers, and you're planning on building an engine, you need to buy a set of these. If you don't know how to read them, you need to buy a set and learn how to read them. It's not that hard. Anybody can do it. So the first thing we got to do is we got to establish our oil clearances. So we have to know what size this crankshaft is. This is our crankshaft. It's been freshly reground, but we have to make sure that we establish the sizes of this. Now, I've already gone through and measured everything and checked all the clearances, but I kind of want to run through it with you so I can show you what I did. So first of all, whenever you use a micrometer, you need to make sure that it is calibrated. So this is what we call a 2 to 3 inch mic. It measures from 2 inches to 3 inches in 1/1000ths increments and even up to 10/1000ths of 1 inch increments. So what we do is, this is a 2 inch pin. Since it's a 2 to 3 mic, 2 inches is our starting point. So we just measure the 2 inch pin, and the mic needs to be zeroed out right on the reading line when we're measuring our pin. I don't know if you can see that, but trust me, it's calibrated. That's where it needs to be. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to mic our crank, because I want to know the clearances between this journal and the bearings. There's an oil clearance that has to be maintained between the bearing and where the journal rides. There is a specification for what that oil clearance should be. We need to make sure that it is correct. So we're going to come out with our micrometer, and we're going to mic this guy. We're going to take a reading right here, and we're going to establish. Now, I've already remiked the crankshaft, and I know that the crankshaft is good after they reground it. It is 10/1000ths undersized. What they did is they took 10/1000ths off the diameter of this bearing. So I'm going to go ahead and mic this. I'm going to get on the center of it, and you got to kind of work this back and forth gently. You don't want to damage the crank journal, and establish that you're in the center. Okay, and there we are. So once we're in the center, what we're going to do is we're going to move this lock over, and we're going to lock the mic so it doesn't move. So now we're locked at this size. I've duplicated the size of this journal right here, and I got my lock snug down so it's not going to move. And if I read this, it says 237.9, almost 238. Standard size is 248, so I know that it's 10/1000ths under, because this is reading 10/1000 smaller than the standard shaft size. So now what I do is I take this tool here. This is called a dial bore gauge. And I take this, and since this is locked, I've literally duplicated the size of my crank journal. So I just take this and I put it right in here, and I just set my indicator. If you look at the indicator up there, it's on 0. Okay, once I get this centered here, you can see there we are. This indicator is on 0. So basically what I have done is I have duplicated the size of this crank journal right here with this on 0. Now I need to put my cap on there. So I've already got all my bearings in here. This is my number 1 bearing cap, and you can see I've got my 10/1000ths under bearing in there. I've also got the upper half of the bearing in the block. The block is upside down right now. Now it's very important, a couple of things. You never want to put these bolts in dry. Spray a little lube on there. And then we're going to set our cap on without the crankshaft installed. We're just going to set our cap right on there, use the bolts as the guides. Now I want you to get a shot of this, Dan. Get up real close on this. I'll get a flashlight. This is where a lot of guys screw up here. if you look at this cap, there's a register on the block. This cap sits down inside the register here. Well, if you look at this side of the register, this is actually a pretty tight fit here. It's designed so the cap fits snugly in here so that the cap won't move around when the engine's running. The problem is if I take and I run these bolts down with this, the edge of this cap sitting up on this ledge, and I try to torque these bolts now, I could snap this cap right in half. That's a common mistake that amateurs make. So very important, whenever you put a main cap on, before you start to torque or tighten those bolts, you have to take a dead blow hammer. You don't have to kill it, but you have to take a dead blow hammer and you have to smack that cap, just like that. Now if you look at that, and you need to visually verify that that cap is sitting down inside this machined area or this register. Don't ever torque those bolts without visually, don't assume that it's down even if you tap on it. Visually verify. Okay, now I can go ahead and run the bolts down, and then I'm going to torque these to specifications. And the reason I'm going to torque them is because I need to know what size hole this bearing is producing to make sure that my clearances are right. So I've got my torque wrench here. I've got it set for my spec. And I like to go in 3 steps. So I'm just going to go ahead and snug it a little bit. I'm not going to go to full torque with it. If you feel like you need to, you can set this at 3 different settings. I've been doing it long enough, I don't need to. And I'm going to go a little tighter on each one, about 2/3 of the torque, and then I'm going to go full torque. Hear the click, click. You go until it clicks. Always take your torque wrench and take the tension off of it. If you don't do that and you leave your torque wrench with tension on it, the torque wrench will become uncalibrated, especially if it's one of these type click type torque wrenches. Okay, so we'll set that aside. Now that we have established the size of our crank here, this is the size of the journal that's going to go inside here. So I simply just take my bore gauge, I put it right inside, and I measure the inside of that bearing. And if you look at my gauge here, we have just a little bit under 3 thousandths. We have about, we have 2 thousandths, and then we have 2.5, about 2 thousandths and 8 10 thousandths. So we have just a little under 3 thousandths of an inch. Well, the specifications say that the main bearing bore clearances on this, the main bearing oil clearances, I'm sorry, on this motor, the 289, should be 2.5 thousandths to 3 thousandths. We're right between 2.5 and 3. So our oil clearances are right on the money. Now we've already gone through and checked every one of these oil clearances, and we know that they're all right on the money. You do the same thing with the connecting rods. On the connecting rod, I am also going to take my micrometer and I'm going to mic the connecting rod journal just like I did the main journal. Then I'm going to take my connecting rod bearing, I'm going to put my connecting rod bearing in the rod, put the cap on, and I'm going to torque the bolts. I'm going to establish the size of my crank journal on my indicator like I did, and then I'm just going to measure this with my indicator and see what my clearance is. And we've already done that. We have about 2 thousandths clearance on the rods and 2.5 to 3, between 2.5 and 3 on the mains, which is right within specs. This is not something that you can skip. Now, when you torque rod caps on, let me show you something. We got a vise over here. Come on over here, Dan. We have a bench vise here. Now this is our bench vise, but we also have another vise here called a rod vise. They sell these. I actually fabricated this one myself and it works just fine. We need to put our connecting rod in here and we need to clamp down on it. You always need to find some way to hold this connecting rod when torquing it. Now you notice that I'm clamped down on the machined area, the big end of the rod. Never, ever, under any circumstances, put this rod into a bench vise and tighten it up because you'll damage it. And never, under any circumstances in a rod vise, take and clamp down on the beam of the rod up here. You got to be on this machined area. If you clamp down on this beam and try to torque these nuts here, you're going to bend the connecting rod. So it's very important that you don't do that. Okay, now once we've established that, come on back over here to our engine. So we've established our oil clearances on our mains and our rods. The next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that our ring end gaps are correct. Okay, so now what I have is we've got our ring set. Your ring set's going to come in a box. There are 3 different rings, and the cool thing about most ring set boxes is they separate the rings in 3 separate compartments. So and it even says on the flapper, this is the top ring groove, this is the second ring groove, and this is my 3rd groove over here, or my oil ring. Now, in order to establish ring end gap, let me explain what ring end gap is. Ring end gap is the gap at the end of the ring when the ring is installed in the cylinder bore, not just, here in my hand. So what I have to do is I have to figure out what that is, because if my ring end gap is too tight, I'm going to blow my engine. So I'm going to go ahead and put my ring in the bore. Okay. Now, the kicker about this is, in order to get an accurate ring end gap measurement, my ring has to be perfectly square in the bore. Well, I can't really eyeball that and go, yeah, that's about right. No, it's not. It's got to be perfect. So what we do is we got our oil rings here. Now they do make tools that you can actually square that ring up, called ring squaring tools. But if you don't have that, which most people don't, just take your oil ring groove. Now with the oil rings, very important, you need to make sure that this expander on the oil ring, that the ends are butted together. You never, ever, under any circumstances, allow this to be overlapped. I can't even get it to overlap. But if this is overlapped here, and these ends are not butted up on the oil ring, see how they're butted against each other? They got to be butted. If they're overlapped and you try to drive the piston in, you're going to crack the piston. So we got to make sure that that is overlapped. Now we also have our scraper rails here. We have our, I got to take these gloves off because I can't do this with gloves on. Gloves are great, but you can't grab any rings with them. So again, my end gap, my ring expander has to be butted together. Then what I do is I just take one of my scrapers with those butted together and I go right over to the left of it and I just establish this underneath and I just kind of work it around right over where that is butted together, and it kind of holds it together there. And then I just roll this ring on. Now you cannot roll compression rings on, but you can roll oil ring scrapers on because they're made of spring steel. They're designed to flex. So my gap is right here. I've got my expander gap. I want to go to the opposite side of that with the other gap on the scraper. And I just go ahead and put this one in and work it around. Well, now that I've got my oil ring in there, I have something that I can square up that ring with. So I just take because the piston's only going to go in until it hits this ring. So I just take my piston and I push that ring down just until this ring, this oil ring, just sits flush up against the bore, and that makes it perfectly square. Now we have a gap in here that we have to check. The gap has to be within specifications. There's a ring gap there. The way that you check that ring gap is with a set of feeler gauges. If you don't have a set of feeler gauges, buy some. Okay, so what we've got one feeler gauge here that we separated from the rest, and this is where we need to be. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take and we're going to put that gauge right in there, and it needs to slide into the gap with just a little bit of resistance. And so our ring end gap is good. Now, as a general rule, your ring end gap should be about 4 thousandths per inch of bore. So we've got a 4.030 bore here. And I'm pulling about 18 thousandths of end gap, which is perfect, okay? So 4 thousandths per inch of bore. Now we've already gone through and established all this for all of our rings. You need to do every cylinder. And again, the ring end gap on this ring or on this cylinder, you need to use the ring that's actually going in that cylinder. So take the top compression ring and the second compression ring and put them both in here and check the gaps. Take the top and second compression ring for this cylinder and check the gaps in this bore. We'll do all 8 of them. We've already established that that is right with this engine. They all came out exactly the same for every cylinder. And so everything worked out. All right, now putting the rings on the piston. Rings will sometimes have a dot on them.
We're at 15 minutes.
That's okay. Actually, stop it right there.